Really excited to be with you guys on this PPIM edition of Pipeline Things. Our first guest, I have to say, is magnificent. And Chris, I grew up, parts of the show, I played Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and there used to be a character in there that was dance like a butterfly, sting like a bee. That was what I was thinking.
This episode actually kind of makes me think of it a little bit differently with 607. Maybe it's more around define like a butterfly and defend like a bee.
Audience, judge for yourself as you join us with Jason Skow. Welcome to the PPIM edition of Pipeline Things. I am your host, Rhett Dotson, my esteemed co-host, Christopher DeLeon, and our even more esteemed second-time repeat guest, Jason Skow. Jason,
couldn't keep him away.
Welcome.
Happy to be here, gentlemen.
So, to our audience, you are probably aware by now that we are going to be covering papers at PPIM, and this is one of the papers that were chosen. Really excited to have you on. But before we get too deep, we always like to start with segue, discussion of things. You have kids, right?
I do have kids.
Do they play Roblox by any chance?
No, they don't play Roblox.
That's a shame. Chris, do your kids play Roblox?
Never.
Okay, well, my kids have gotten
Did you just
into
fail?
Roblox. No, I didn't.
Okay.
The segue is still valid.
Okay. Somebody plays Roblox here. So
Somebody, it's not me. I will tell you it's not me, but it is my kids. And so there is this sub game within Roblox called Dress to Impress. And as part of Dress to Impress, like you go through and they give you a genre and then you have to go pick out your clothes and they do like a mock fashion show. So I have 3 girls.
This sounds like a different game than what I was thinking of. But okay.
You're going. Like wondering like, how does this relate to the pipeline industry or me or anything that's going on?
I have 100% faith that you can draw that line.
Bring this home, baby.
Right.
We're all curious.
There are superpowers that as a host of a podcast you have, and this is one of them, the ability to draw other parallels from otherwise completely unrelated things. So my 3 daughters, Reese, Aubrey, and Peyton, love to play this game right now. They've even drugged my wife into playing this game. And they will, and it's really, really humorous to see them do this.
And it's Say Yes to the Dress, Roblox edition.
Say Yes to the Dress rhymes, but no, it's Dress to Impress.
Oh, sorry.
Right. And you should know this game's permeated enough where look, my son had his band Homecoming, and the theme was Dress to Impress.
Okay.
And there was mass confusion at the high school level whether it meant dress to impress like Roblox or what you would conventionally think of, which is dress up for homecoming. Where I'm going with this is you clearly came dressed to impress. I want the audience to know if you're not watching on the YouTube, this is your moment. I thought we were shooting virtual. Usually when we shoot virtual, I'm relaxed attire. I wasn't thinking PPIM attire. So I'm here in my 2022 Astros hoodie. Chris showed up with
On brand hoodie.
Is it? I mean, it's not.
It's on brand.
I don't. It's green. It's got that.
What is Sarah doing? Am I on brand?
Point is, Jason, thanks for dressing up like you were at a conference to make it look
Like if
we
this was
did shoot
PPIM.
yes,
Yeah,
because
this
we
is
did shoot
PPIM
this
edition.
episode early. So if y'all are wondering, we don't have the full PPIM environment here. We had to get Jason Skow while he was here, which is shortly before
we had
PPIM.
to have Jason back on, and so we made it happen.
But we
So-
more like I look like I'm dressed to depress, right? You came here. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean,
what do you think about the link? Does it make sense?
yeah,
now?
the link makes sense. And, I'm a little overdressed, I would say. And, my theory is, you fake it till you make it. Okay. So
You even got the little
You're
thing
such
right.
a
Like, here's
liar.
the breast
you
Such a
size.
liar.
you guys are, you guys are running the show here. You got all this, industry recognition, authority, if you will.
Oh, is that it?
So I got to dress up here just to keep it, just to be
No.
the same
If I
crowd
put
as
the
you guys.
hood on during the show, does it lessen?
Oh, this is even
Does it get
worse.
dark at this?
You look a little more dangerous. I don't know what you're going for, but
All right, so audience, we're fully gauged here. Y'all are with us now. Hopefully, you enjoy our banter back and forth. So today's topic, the paper, I'm going to go right into it. So we switch gears from dress to impress in that just high level segue.
sure.
Can you do it? Can you make that gear shift that quick?
I'm going to keep talking about dress wear, but go ahead.
I'm curious if he's about to parallel 607 requirements with fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Chris, there are limits.
There's a
to
link
the
there. There's a link
superpower. We are going to explore it, Miss Producer. If you will please write that down. That question will be coming up in the second half of the episode.
Okay.
What is the link between 607 and fake it till you make it. So, but your paper was estimating ILI tool performance and identifying unique pipe populations for material verification.
That's a long title.
It is. I was about to say, and I usually target funny titles or
It's
like
not funny.
you don't. That is all business.
That title is pretty much half the paper.
That's it. So that's all we need to say about it.
I can dive into that title a little bit more, but sure.
All right, so phone a friend, Chris.
But it's
Jason
so
needs you to send-
relevant. It's so relevant, right? So
Yeah.
Give us the relevance.
right. So if we go back and think of RIN 1, obviously mega rule. So we have material properties verification 192.607, and in it, it's basically if you don't have TVC material records, you have to go get them. So how do I do that? And the meat of it that we often find is in, I think it's paragraph E. So 607E. And I think basically what we're trying to accomplish is one of the first things you do is you establish populations. Once you establish populations, then you go sample those populations to identify what it's made out of. And if you find something that's not what you thought it to be, you have to do an alternate sampling approach. And guess what we don't want to end up in?
Alternative sampling.
We don't want to end up in all, well, I mean, ideally you don't, right? So you want to establish populations. And this paper is going to help us understand a little bit how we can do that with
And
ILI.
those populations were defined on specific characteristics.
100%, right?
Do
So
you
there's-
know, is it 7 characteristics?
Hey, you're just going to throw around the word populations? Are we talking about a bunch of people here, Chris? I mean, come on. What are we talking about here?
There is a numerical definition of population that we're going to talk about today. And obviously, I mean, we're pipelining things, but obviously we have ILI gravity, right? So normally when we do things, we normally gravitate towards how you can use inline inspection. And fortunately, we also have references, and we know that ILI can be a big help, right? It produces a lot of discrete data that we can then use to make better decisions. Hopefully not end up in alternate sampling plans because you found something you didn't know.
So, Jason, now that Chris
Yes,
has
Rhett.
set the stage.
Yes, Rhett.
Let's drop that voice down, make it deep, baby. So now that Chris has set the stage, what's going on in your paper? What's the driver for this paper? And I'm actually genuinely curious because I feel like 607 was talked about a lot, maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, and it doesn't feel like it's been the same level of maybe some stuff around alternative sampling. But what brought you to this paper? What's the challenge?
Yeah, the challenge in this paper is, all these operators using ILI tools to measure all kinds of stuff. And we start talking about populations, the 607 defines it. They got quite a bit of criteria there. Like I think you were alluding to at the beginning, the data construction, the date of manufacturing, and it's real tight, like within 3 years. So, or I guess within 2 years,
2
like if it's
years,
3,
yeah.
It's like it's outside that boundary.
That's for date of manufacture, right?
Yeah, and so
One of the
they're
characteristics.
defining population. Like when I look at populations, I'm thinking something that you can treat it. It's all part of the same group. Like they act the same. They have the same attributes. But if you think of manufacturing, like you might have bought something that was manufactured in the same year, but then you installed it 3 years apart, and they're saying, "Hey, this is a different population." So number one, the 607 is putting up a lot of challenges here because those are really, from what I would call a population, those are not really different populations. And what I would care about is the attributes of the pipe are different. The way it contains pressure is different, or the way you might assess risk is different. I'd call that a population. But if it's going to be the same across, I would say, well, you can group those things together. Mm-hmm. So 607 puts up a lot of challenge in that regard. Now, what the ILI tool does is the ILI tool goes through and measures these attributes like wall thickness. It can sometimes detect seam differences. If there's a type of seam, it can detect that. It has some indication of yield strength. And so if you put those things together, you should be able to use the ILI data to say, well, here's a group of pipelines that's part of the same population.
Yeah.
I think you can legitimately do that, but there's something lacking, and that's what this paper was all about, was if you go back to the vendors for the ILI tools,
Yeah.
they don't tell you we're 95% chance that this is a population, or if this is this kind of difference in the attributes, that it's 80% chance. They're not giving us that spec. It's not yet anyways. It's maybe too early. And so what this paper is about is we looked at a big data set, and we tried to ascertain ourselves, what do we think that performance is that the ILI is achieving at identifying individual populations?
So our last chat was around, we brought 1163 in quite a bit, and I always like to share that a little bit, right?
There's a good link there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when we look at an ILI system, often if you've looked at them for any period of time, you should be trained to say, hey, what's the spec?
Right.
And when you look at the spec, there is a construct of it that's defined in 1163. And often what we'll find is we'll let's call it size and accuracy specs. That's kind of one element. But then the other element of it is it's what we talk about POD and POI.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's normally where we'll see things like, okay, what do we think the system can do? Can it find wall thickness changes? Well, would you normally go to the spec to see if it can? No, it doesn't. It doesn't communicate things that way. Right. It says we can find girth welds. We can find these characteristics of the pipe. And they'll say we could do this at 90% confidence or between 50 and 90 or less than 50.
And metal loss, we can find it. This is how big it has to be and this is how good we can find it.
But now we have to figure out how to interpret that spec to establish populations.
Right.
And what'd you think?
Well, yeah, that's what I was looking at. And you brought up 1163 and kind of the closest link to 1163 is something like POD or POI, because if you think of a population, it's kind of like a yes or no, like is it a separate population or not? So it's like a 0 or 1. It's like a binary.
Yeah.
So you know what else is like that? POI, probability of identification. Like, is it corrosion or is it a crack or is it something else? POD is a little bit like that. Is there a feature there? Yes or no. We're not talking about size yet. We're just saying, did we detect it? Is it there? So this problem is a binary problem, but it's got an additional complication. It's not just purely binary, right?
Tick-tock.
So for example, with wall thickness, as the difference in wall thickness gets bigger, you're going to have a better chance of detecting that. And as it gets smaller, there's actually a chance where the ILI tool kind of maybe misses one of those, or maybe it screws that up. It doesn't call it correctly. Yeah. So what you end up having, you can imagine like if you have like a graph like an X and Y, like along one axis, you're saying, well, how big is that difference in wall thickness? And the bigger it gets, the higher that curve climbs. And then you'd have a probability. So in some cases, the probability might be 50%. But if the wall thickness difference is big enough, your probability climbs up, could be almost close to 100%, could be 99% accuracy on that. So that's one complication. The second complication is that we have multiple attributes that we're looking for.
I knew it.
Right. So we're not only looking at wall thickness, we're saying, well, there could be a wall thickness change and there might be a seam change. And if you have both of them, then you can be even more sure that these are two different populations. And so your probability of discerning those things can be low in some cases, but it can be also very high if you have a lot of differences.
So which variables, because which ones were you able to look at from 607 and not able to look at from 607?
Yeah, we looked at 3 variables in this paper. Diameter is an easy one, but all the data sets we had were all the same diameter. And it's kind of almost a no-brainer. If it's a different diameter, okay, call that.
The ILI tool gets the wrong diameter. We have a serious issue here.
Right. So that's in there, but we didn't use it in this paper. Okay. In this paper, we looked at wall thickness, seam type, or seam type, you could say, and then yield strength. We looked at those 3. Now, the other ones that are listed in 607, they talk about manufacturing date and they talk about construction date.
You got a tool that can do manufacturing date?
I don't. And that's why it's not in
with
the
an
paper.
Accuracy of plus or minus 2 years. Oh, it can't be plus or minus 2 years, plus or minus 1 year.
Yeah. So it's really, really tight. Now, I think as we implement this as an industry, we're going to have to really scrutinize, why are we using manufacturing dates within 2 years? And I'm sure there's a lot of debate on that. So I stepped away from that debate. Yeah. We didn't have that information and we didn't use it in the paper. But I think overall, if we think of what are we trying to achieve? What's PHMSA trying to achieve? What is the industry trying to achieve? I don't think a 2-year difference in construction date is probably chasing
more construction
the right
contractor than construction date at that point, but that's a different animal.
Yeah.
And manufacturing.
So wall thickness, long seam, and then you mentioned
yield strength.
Yeah. So I want to ask you 2 questions on that. With respect to long seam, can you speak to was it a single oriented MFL technology, or did you use multiple orientations? So was it just axially or was it circumferentially oriented?
We had different ILI runs. Okay. Some were circumferential and some were axial. Okay. And some were both.
Second thought is that not all of the vendors, and I'm sure our audience is aware of this, not all of the vendors determine what you called yield strength the same way. The technology premise is different. Did you look at this across multiple vendors, or was this primarily concentrated in a single vendor?
This was concentrated in a single vendor, but you bring up a really good point with yield strength. Maybe I'll kind of iterate a point on that. With the yield strength, the tool is measuring something that has to do with yield strength. And there's some debate on how good it is at coming up with what the yield strength is. And what we were doing is we were using that data to determine populations. We were not using that data to say, this is what we think the yield strength is. So if you have the yield strength measurements from a tool and it has, one group, it's kind of scattered within a range, and then you see, okay, well, now it's moved on to another section of the line, and now it's scattered, but it's in a kind of a different scatter zone. We weren't saying, well, this is the yield strength that pipe has. We were saying these two are different enough that we're going to classify those as different populations. So we only used it to that level. And if you read the paper, we have kind of a heuristic, like a mathematical trick that we say, if we do this math, we're pretty sure that these two things are different. And what we did there was we looked at an indication that the distribution, if you look at the yield strength, is binomial, meaning like it has two peaks or it has multimodal peaks. So that's what we were looking at. And if we think it has more than one peak, or we think it's, not a normal distribution, then we will say it's more likely that this comes from two different populations.
Yeah, that's interesting. What I like about that is that, rather than specifically needing grade, you can particularly rely upon what you called differences in grade, right? And definitely no vendor has a spec on differences in grade that I'm aware of. Grade maybe, but not differences in grade. And it kind of opens up the possibilities a little bit of what you can look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's a little bit of a simplification, but for the purposes of trying to figure out, well, how many populations do you have? You don't necessarily at that step need to know, well, here's the grade that we're measuring, and here's that compares to this grade in our records and so on. I'm not worried about that. I'm just looking for these populations.
Can you do it? So, all right, deliver the baby for me. Before I go to the break.
Okay.
What did you find?
We found that if you combine all three of these attributes, that in a lot of cases, you can be very confident in your distinguishing populations from an eye.
So does having multiple ones actually help you? Like I was thinking, 1 over X times 1 over X times 1 over X, that would make it more difficult to get to confidence.
Yeah,
but if you have multiple
it's 1
ones,
minus 1 over X.
This is why Rhett Dotson is not a statistician. Thank you. So,
well, think of it this way. Let's say you had your first attribute and it was a wall thickness change. But let's say it's quite a small one, so you're not really confident. You're maybe 50%. You're like, it's a small wall thing. We think this might be a new population. But then you dig into the data and then you say, oh, well, there's actually also a difference in the seam type. So that actually reinforces that there's a difference between the two. So it actually compounds in a way that it gets more and more confident.
Makes perfect sense.
As there are more differences, yeah.
All right. I have lots of questions I want to ask you when we come back on this. Audience, we want to dig into maybe where some of the gaps are, where this assessment needs to go moving forward. So hang on, and we're going to be right back with Jason Skow after the break. Welcome back to Pipeline Things right after the break. And so we are here with Jason Skow, and we're continuing our discussion on his overly long titled paper, Estimating ILI Tool Performance and Identifying Unique Pipe Populations for Material Verification.
Fake it till you make it.
Coming up at the end, y'all are going to get the answer to that question, but not right now, because Jason, we have special questions for you.
We do.
The most difficult ones that you will answer today.
Is this the dreaded rapid fire?
They're not dreaded. These are fun.
And I'm going to hold them away from you.
This is how people get to know you.
I think you're just preparing in case like a fight breaks out here.
It's possible. The first one,
we'll be back.
You know what you don't realize? Chris is on my side.
The
right?
first one, probably so on this one, but let's see.
Hey,
the first one,
I'm a striker. That's a bad combo.
The first one divides entire families for sure.
Yeah, shoot.
Apple or Android?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not strong one or the other. I have an Apple, but it's not. I don't have a real strong reason.
Correct
for
answer.
It.
Continue.
Doesn't matter. You have an Apple. You've already identified yourself.
I also have a Mac computer as well. So it's
you're way deep. You're all the way.
Look at Sarah's face.
Next.
Look at Sarah's face.
And you know what? Other people in the company.
You should have just straight answered Apple.
Other people in my company, they have the Microsoft laptop. And then, when there's an update, like every 10th time, they're like blue screen. I'm working. Okay. I'm working.
All right. Back to rapid fire. Football or football?
Football.
Okay. Good. Curling or hockey?
Hockey.
Did you play?
I did not play. I'm one of the few Canadians that didn't play hockey.
I started to put in there whether or not it was Oilers or Flames, but I figured that's probably...
It's Oilers, but I'm a fair weather fan.
Me too.
Just I'm watching I'll watch the Super Bowl. I think I know 3 of the 4 teams still in it, so I'm a fair weather fan.
Yeah. Do you think that hockey is rigged like people think the NFL is rigged?
I don't think hockey is rigged. No, there's too much variability. You know, if you think of okay, this is a little off topic, but you think of a chessboard.
He's about to give us the
You know,
statistics answer.
a
on
chessboard.
hockey.
You know, it's the number of squares, 64 squares in a chessboard, and how many different possible moves you can make, and it's like more than the atoms in the universe type of thing. Just imagine you didn't have squares. Okay, that's like what a sports game is like. There's an unlimited number of possibilities. It's super.
But historically,
that's why it's fun to watch.
Historically, sports games have been fixed throughout history. Never mind. All right.
Yeah.
Skiing or snowboard?
Skiing.
Okay.
I'm not coordinated enough to do that one.
And since I heard that you're into like martial arts stuff, is your first inclination to punch or kick?
Well, I've been training in jiu-jitsu recently, so I'm learning to not punch. But my inclination is still to punch. Like if you were to come at me right now, I'm throwing, man. but
Live, you saw it here on Pipeline Things. Rhett came at Jason.
But I started jiu-jitsu like a few months back with my kids, and I realized I'm just getting out of shape. I'm not going to win any competitions, but I get tapped out 20 times a night. It's embarrassing, but I'm getting in shape. And my kids are learning.
I started working out too, and I did something called body pump. And the first one, I didn't walk for like 4 days after. And there were 60-year-old women just destroying me in that class. So
no, I feel that pain. I feel that pain. I was
on
when I first started,
tape.
I couldn't do 4 minutes, but now I can do 20. And I'm getting up there.
All right, catching up the audience, going back. So when we finished up our last segment, back to the show, we were talking about your conclusions from your study, and the conclusion you reached was that with the variables for looking at populations, namely wall thickness, differences in grade, and seam type, the combination of those means that we can have a very high confidence in the identification of a population based on ILI.
Not so fast, my friend. Not so fast.
Oh, he felt like he was coming at me. And if he's throwing a punch, I'm ducking.
No. Well, you're right about that. You can be very confident, but when we think of these binomial problems where there's just like two outcomes, we actually have 4 different possible outcomes from that, because you have a prediction from the tool, which is like it's a new population or not. And then you have what's reality, it's a new population or not. And so you can call it to be a population and be right, or you can call it not to be a population and it is another population. So you have kind of like a 2x2 matrix, like 4 different kind of possible answers you can have there. Yeah, exactly. You're drawing it right there.
I'm just doing it to make so I can follow you in the conversation. Sorry.
Yeah. And when we have an ILI tool that finds a population, we're very, very good at, determining what's that probability that it actually is a population. And that's one kind of performance. But the other one that you have to think about is, what if the tool didn't call any different population? What's the chance that there's another population buried in there? That's a different kind of performance. So in statistics, one is called, recall, and one is called precision. But it's just kind of measuring those 2 different errors.
So what's the standard, right? So if we look at 607, one of the first numbers we see in there outside of like 1 per mile or up to 150 digs, we see another number, and that number is 95%. And their descriptor is confidence.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about that? Are you proposing that in this paper a means to establish a 95% confidence in your population?
Yeah. Well, that's an excellent question, Chris. And I think I know where you're going with that, which is the statistics in the way it's written up in 607 are a bit loose. They're not quite giving us the performance that we would need to, as an engineer or statistician, to come up with, how many digs do we need to do? Like, how do we get to that performance? And I'll tell you why. You could be 95% confident of something, but your performance could be terrible. Like, let me give you an example. I'm never going to achieve this performance, and I'm 95% confident that I'll never achieve it. So what am I really saying there?
You fake it till you make it.
I'm faking it till I make it. Exactly.
Wait, say that
so
again.
you actually need 2 numbers to define a performance. You need to say, I'm going to achieve this level of performance, like maybe 80%, like the ILI tools. 80% of the time, this is what I'm going to get. But then if I repeat that over and over again, 95% of those times I'm achieving that. So you need 2 numbers. You need a performance, like a probability, and then you need a confidence. And with the 607, they just say 95%. They don't give you 2 numbers. Yeah. And so we have to interpret that. So here's how I interpret it.
Yeah.
I think it's the average probability of defining a population. I think that's what they meant when they said 95% confidence, even though it's a bit ambiguous. From, I think, a straight statistics perspective.
Well, we appreciate that because there is a lot of room for interpretation.
I can be honest, I'm still thinking about what that means.
Well, often what we find,
ask me a question, right? Ask me a question about it because I probably just
want
said
you
it
to say it
in a
again.
stupid way.
What does it mean that it's the average probability? Are you basically stating that 95% of the time when they call a population, it will be correct? Is that way? So if I were to look at 100 calls, I should expect approximately 5% of them to not be, in layman's terms?
In layman's terms, yeah. And for each one of those performances, usually have an upper and lower bound, like a confidence, right? Around an average performance. And so I'm interpreting the 607 to just be the average performance with no bounds on it. And I'm going to, as an engineer working, for an operating company, I'm going to impose some bounds. And then I'm going to try to rationalize why I picked those bounds because the 607 doesn't give it to us.
we have a saying for that.
Yeah.
Define and defend.
Yeah.
And when there's room for
I
interpretation,
think that's what you have to do, right? I think that's your best option, your best strategy.
you write a policy and then you defend it. And
It also sounded better than punch and block.
So, I mean, to put some...
I define it with these 5 fingers.
But again, we threw a lot of terms out here, Jason, right?
Yeah.
And, for somebody who might not be as versed as yourself or other people who are doing statistics around assessments, I feel like it would be helpful for us to kind of bring some of that back down. One of the things that we'll see in ILI performance specs is they won't use probability, they'll say certainty.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so, for example, a lot of times the way we normally try to interpret that is it's how many times was it correct? Right?
Yes.
And so you would say this has an 80% certainty or 90% certainty, or that's where a lot of times we'll see somebody say, well, 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
But then we also see that term of confidence, right? And so normally, I think we talked about on the last one, right? Where normally we try to communicate things as intervals, and you now pretty said maybe it's the average of that. And a lot of different people might say, well, I want to use confidence intervals. And if the upper bound says that it is possible to achieve a confidence level of 90, then I'm happy. Then I'm good.
And bringing it back to the paper, we talked about 3 different measures that we're defining performance around. So in the paper, we define how to come up with a confidence around each estimate. So for wall thickness, you have, an average performance, and you have an upper and lower bound.
Perfect.
And then for seam, you have, you're predicting the seam, if the seam type change, and you have a probability up and down or a confidence around that because it's just a binomial confidence like Klopper-Pearson, like right at 1163.
Yep.
And then the same thing with yield strength. We have a confidence around making the call. And in that one, like I was explaining earlier, is a heuristic rule. So the heuristic rule is not always right. So it's kind of, has a confidence. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not. And we could come up, this is a first paper on this topic. We could come up with a better rule. You could look at, machine learning, and you could look at grouping populations by several metrics. We used a simple one here, and we could probably improve on that. But this is the one that we published, and we think it's straightforward and easy to interpret.
And again, one of the reasons why I really appreciate what you guys did here is because often when an operator or us as consultants, when we're asked, hey, can you help with this? We need things to grab onto to help us define, so that then we can defend, right? And this is one of the works that people can turn and start leaning into. And one of the other things I'll put out there, right, is it's, when an operator is reading or a consultant's reading 607, again, I think paragraph E, and they say you need to define populations with all these criteria, you would say, well, where does it say I can use ILI? Can I?
In fact, in the QA, there's actually a section where it does say you can use ILI, right?
So
there was a QA that PHMSA issued.
Batch 1 for RIN 1 of FAQs, and I think it's FAQ 21.
He's so bad about it, Mr. Producer.
It's FAQ 21
of
of batch 1 of RIN 1 FAQs. And in fact, they do say that, right? They say inline inspection can be used to establish populations. And so this allows an operator to say, okay, great. How can I start thinking about using ILI for populations? And you have the framework from a regulatory perspective to do it.
Yeah. And I called them QAs, but they're FAQs, right? That's a better one. So what else they have in the FAQs?
What's that?
They have this really interesting one that says, what if I don't know the data construction? What do I do then? And you know what the answer is? You just bucket them into like an unknown.
Yeah.
And you just go from there. And, unfortunately, this has...
And if you find 2 that are different, those become new buckets, and now you have to go into an alternate sampling.
Exactly. But, you get into this difficulty of... If you have more data, you're going to split them up into smaller and smaller groups because of the requirements of construction and manufacturing dates. So you're going to have lots of populations, but if you don't have the records, you're going to start grouping them into bigger populations.
Yeah.
And the thing I don't like about that concept is it gives you an advantage to not know. And I think generally when you have regulations and best practices, you want to encourage finding out more records or digging harder, and that you get some benefit from it. In this case, there's a decent chance that you find out more, and it's actually more costly. Or it's more.
Jason,
hold on.
Jason, you're
hold
digging,
on.
you're scratching
Hold
itch,
on.
you're turning over rock. You don't want to do. I'm telling you.
Hold on. Or
I'm telling you.
Go.
or it's not more expensive, right? So think about the dynamic segmentation along the right of way: unknown, known, unknown, known, unknown. And if you don't know what the unknowns are and you put them in a bucket and it's less than 1 mile, how many digs do you do?
You know, I love you thinking 3D, Chris, because you're right. It goes both ways.
How many digs do you do? If it's less than 1 mile, you can have 5 different unknowns, and it's 1 dig.
Yeah.
So you might have only identified one of the 5 unknown
Absolutely
populations.
right. Yeah, there's uncertainty here. I was saying one side of it, and Chris, you were thinking multidimensional.
And I was on the third side. I was like, it's not just limited to this. What if I do a hydro test, then run a crack inspection? Do I have to repair all the immediate crack inspections, even if I just did a hydro test? Don't answer that
My
question.
paper doesn't cover that.
I know, but that's a penalized potentially for getting more information option. So,
Yeah.
And I thought that's where Chris was going to go, and he didn't.
No.
So, Jason, before we go, last question.
Shoot.
Do y'all answer the fake it till it make it? That came out. I heard that.
It 100% does.
That's what I thought. Yeah, it was around the confidence.
95%
stuff.
confidence.
Yeah. The whole point of it is
Got
that
it.
you could say it's 95% confident, but you don't establish what the performance is. You're
Got
faking
you.
it till you make it.
Got it. Where do you want to go next in this, or is this topic pretty much covered for you? Where do you see the future of 182.607 and this evaluation with ILI?
In ILI related work.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is we're probably going to come to more formalized performance specifications around defining populations. I also think we're going to be able to define a lot of populations using ILI tools. I think that's really going to help us out in this effort. So we have, I think the follow-on for me personally is, I'll look at some of these performance specs that we defined. I think we can refine them. One thing that you always got to think about when you're coming up with specs like this is like, what data did you use? Did you collect enough data? If new data emerges, how does that change what you've done? So we haven't done the complete study on this. We were working with a great operator. They had a very good data set, but does it cover the full spectrum for the industry? The answer is no. This is more tuned to the operator that we were working with in their data set. So you have to keep working at this and refine it. So I'm going to be on side with that. And I'm also on side with helping the industry come up with more generalized performance that would apply across, let's say, all the operators in the industry. And I think, Rhett, you were mentioning last time we talked on this, that, things like the diameter matter, because different tools at different diameters, they have slightly different performance around these attributes that we care about. So we need to include more diameters. We need to include more different types of runs. We need to include more different types of vendors. But the concept is ILI can really help us define populations, and it's a great tool, and we should use it.
Fantastic. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for being on. And we have one last opportunity for you, which will be unique to our PPIM guests as a part of the series.
Okay.
What question would you like to ask Christopher and I?
Oh, live?
Live.
Turn off the
Unfiltered.
camera. I got 10 questions.
No, you only get one. And she's going to edit out the silence while you think
And
about
you
it,
better
so don't
not ask
worry.
the question that you asked when we were offline.
Yeah,
No.
I'm not going to ask that one.
Yeah, that could fracture our relationship.
Yeah.
I would say, last time I was on, Rhett, you were...
It's just to me.
You were saying, that Chris and I have a bromance, and you felt left out.
That's why I sat in between the two of you.
Is that why you sat between us?
That is
Rhett?
why I sat in between
Is that
you.
why you sat between us? Because normally our guests sit between us, and I'm on that side.
Jason, the answer to that question is, having met you in person now and sat beside you for the duration of this episode, I understand the bromance. I get it.
And I was going to say, welcome to the club. It's a menage a trois now.
Oh my gosh, you heard it first on Pipeline Things. Jason, thank you for joining us. That is the conclusion of our PPIM episode on Jason Skow with the overly long title, Estimating ILI Tool Performance and Identifying Unique Pipe Populations for Material Verification. Thanks, and see you again in 2 weeks. Special thanks to executive producer Sarah Etier, Jason Skow of Integral Engineering, and the Work Lodge for hosting us while we film.